On our newscast tonight, more findings are released in the death of a 23-year-old soldier who was allegedly beaten to death by a senior-ranking serviceman. We turn to an expert for a look at the case and ask how military culture can be reshaped. South Korean survivors of Japan's wartime sexual slavery are in the U.S. in effort to raise awareness of the issue and force Japan to admit its past atrocities. The second round of talks, this time with U.S. officials that handle foreign and security policies, is being planned. And as the death toll rises in West Africa, the U.S. issues a level 1 alert as some health experts express fear there is no solid strategic plan for controlling the outbreak. We have more, so stay with us for early edition at 6.
I see trees of green, red roses.
늘 남편 먼저,
I see them
늘 자식 먼저.
for me and
레이디 퍼스트라는 말을 믿고 살아온 당신. 오늘만큼은 세상 누구보다 당신이 먼저입니다. 한 분 한 분 특별하게 모시겠습니다.
Excellence in Flight, Korean Air.
It's 6 in the evening on Thursday, August 7th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Na Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for joining us. Well, 2 Korean survivors of Japan's wartime sexual slavery system, they are visiting the U.S. and they're on a mission to make sure Japan pays its long overdue price for wartime crimes.
Well, last week they met with White House officials, and words out of Washington is that there may be another one coming next month. Park Ji-won reports.
Quoting diplomatic sources in Washington, Seoul-based Yonhap News and YTN report that the White House will soon hold another round of meetings with 2 Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul, both in their 80s, held closed-door talks with White House officials at the end of last month during a 15-day trip to the U.S., which came to an end on Wednesday. The upcoming meetings will reportedly be attended by the White House officials in charge of foreign affairs policies. It's expected they could place pressure on the U.S. State Department to be more proactive in solving the long-standing issue. International calls on Japan to make amends for forcing women into sexual slavery before and during World War II has picked up in recent weeks. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Nabi Pillay criticized Tokyo on Wednesday for failing to resolve the issue. In response to Pillay's criticism, Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said the issue was covered in a 1965 treaty between Korea and Japan, when Korea received some $800 million in aid and loans as part of the settlement. Pillay, whose term ends this month, emphasized that the women continue to suffer decades later due to the senseless remarks of Japanese officials who continue to deny the atrocities were ever carried out, with some even referring to them as prostitutes. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Back here in the nation, President Park Geun-hye continues with her agenda of realizing a peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. The Presidential Reunification Committee on this Thursday held its very first meeting since being formed last month. Ji Myung-gil has the details.
The Park Geun-hye administration has placed a priority on economic reform in recent weeks, but has also shifted its focus back toward a unification drive with North Korea, an initiative that was overshadowed by April's very tragedy and the escalation of provocations out of North Korea. President Park on Thursday ordered members of a newly established 50-member special committee to draw up measures for building up infrastructure in North Korea and improving the lives of the North Korean people as a first step. President Park noted that next year marks 70 years since the peninsula was divided and said the task of preparing for unification could not be delayed any longer. The committee plans to conduct joint government and civilian research for unification and arouse greater public interest in the matter. President Park has said that a reunification of the two Koreas will be an economic bonanza for the peninsula and neighboring countries. During a speech in Dresden, Germany in March, she called for bolstering cross-border exchanges as a first step toward building trust between the rival Koreas and laying the groundwork for unification. The two Koreas have been divided for more than 6 decades following the 1950 to 1953 Korean War, which ended in a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
A pro-North Korea daily in Japan says Pyongyang's recent missile launches are meant as a protest against the U.S. military presence in South Korea. A piece in the Joseon Shinbo says the tests are a warning against the U.S. and calls for a halt to this month's joint military drills between Seoul and Washington. Now comparing Pyongyang's test launches to a shield and the U.S.-South Korea exercises to a spear, the article says the North Korean regime is prepared to fire off its ballistic missiles in defense if necessary. It added the tensions on the peninsula could lead to war. Now, North Korea has test-fired short-range ballistic missiles on 7 different occasions so far this year.
Talks on extending the transfer of Washington's wartime operational control over the South Korean military have been ongoing for months, but Seoul and Washington may be nearing a conclusion to delay the transfer another 5 years to the year 2020. Here's Arirang.
Talks on transferring the wartime operational control of South Korean forces from Washington to Seoul are underway, and it looks like the transfer will be delayed by 5 years to 2020. Delegations led by Korea's Deputy Defense Minister Ryu Jae-seung and U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, David Helvey, are currently in Washington to discuss the appropriate timing. Sources there say they agree South Korea's military needs more time to bolster its defense and other capabilities to counter threats posed by North Korea. This meeting is crucial as it could be the last round of talks before the two allies announced their agreement at their annual defense ministerial meeting in Washington in October. The U.S. took control of South Korean forces during the Korean War back in the early 1950s. Peacetime control was returned in 1994, and the South Korean military is set to achieve full autonomy next year if it takes over wartime operational control as previously scheduled. But following Pyongyang's third nuclear test in February last year, Seoul had asked Washington to delay the transfer. South Korea's defense minister Han Min-gu has also been pointing to the changing circumstances behind Seoul's request, emphasizing that North Korea has been carrying out realistic drills since Kim Jong-un took power in 2012. Yurian, Arirang News.
The latest military bullying scandal where a 23-year-old conscript soldier was found to have died after being bullied for months is still sending shockwaves throughout the nation.
Very strong shockwaves for that matter. The head of Korea's Military Human Rights Center held a press briefing earlier today. He said the victim, identified only by his family name Yun, was clinically dead by the time he was transported to a nearby hospital. The center chief also claimed that the army private was killed primarily as a result of a severe beating by his comrades, and again urged his attackers be charged with murder. He also had some new findings today. Let's take a look.
We found that when the victim was sent to the hospital, one of his attackers said, "If we are asked about the bruises on his chest, let's say he got them while receiving CPR. This is a serious situation."
Well, Yoon was reportedly frequently bullied by his fellow servicemen, and there are many misdeeds that were carried out on him, that we find too graphic to be described in our newscast. An army sergeant who had allegedly been bullied by his comrades also went on a shooting rampage. This was back in June, killing 5 soldiers. So there has been a string of such incidents, too often, too many, too recently here in Korea.
So the recent cases have reignited discussion about Korea's military culture. The 2-year of mandatory service can be challenging in many number of ways for the servicemen.
and parts of the military culture have been viewed as chronically problematic by many. To discuss the issue and how the people and the military should respond to the matter, we have Professor Arirang live in the studio with us.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor. Now, what are your thoughts on the response that the Korean military gave to the recent cases?
I think they are following the same paths they took in the previous instance. They apologized for the mistakes to the people, and they filed commenders related to the incident, and they promised not to recur this kind of incident again. And finally, they created a certain special team to investigate the causes and to recommend the remedies in order to stop this kind of incident. However, we failed to stop this kind of incident based on these approaches. We did the same thing in the wake of the shooting spree in 2005, 2011, and recently June this year. So I think we need to change the approaches. For example, the military, I think, tend to focus on the barracks culture of the soldiers, but the root may be deeper than this. For example, the poor quality of the officers, the captains and lieutenants cannot have the capability to control the soldiers.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
We'll touch on that matter a little bit later on. But before that, perhaps you could elaborate on, I mean, since you did point out that we've been doing it the wrong way by the military and civilian government level. So in your opinion, Professor, also retired colonel you are, as you've experienced life in the military as long as anyone who is probably tasked with the duties that they have right now, how would you approach the subject, the issue, and come up with necessary measures from this point on?
The first approach should be, I think, that we should admit that we may be wrong, so we should change the approaches. And second, I think, would be there is two kind of deep-rooted causes. We find deep-rooted causes instead of superficial roots. That is that there are. The reason I come up with is that the first one is, as I told you before, poor quality of the officers. Right now, most of the platoon leaders is composed of the ROTC officers, which would be about 5,000 members a year. But the volunteers to be the ROTC officers is very, very dramatically decreasing because they have to serve for 20 months years, compared to the 21 years of the soldier service period. And so instead of without changing this system, we cannot have the smart officers who can control the soldiers. And secondly, I think we need to think deeply how to empower the soldiers instead of how to control the soldiers. Right now, I think the remedies, I assume, would be how to control the soldiers. There may be more controlling measures to check the behaviors and the bullying actions of among the soldiers. But without giving more freedom and more authority, definitely with responsibility, we cannot prevent this kind of incident.
So what we thought was the solution may have been the root of the problem all along, forcing them into a situation where they're stressed out and where there's a lot of internal hierarchy and bullying going on.
Yes, you're right.
I mean, I think some of the public might be wondering this as well. Is it really hard for Korea to have or keep that dual duty of protecting the nation, but at the same time making the right environment for the young soldiers?
But I think that point may not correct. And the main purpose of our soldiers in the military is to defend our country.
Exactly.
We do not exist to take care of themselves. So if we think it is a burden, we don't have to maintain the military. The first priority is how to defend our military. So our approach to solve this problem is how to mitigate the burden to take care of the soldiers. That means they have to reduce the officers' burdens by empowering, by giving authority and giving freedom of actions to the soldiers, like the soldiers of U.S. military and Israel military. They are very smart. They are already university school, college school students.
Right, they are trusted with the responsibility,
yes,
and they
we
react
give
in
their
kind.
freedom of action and authority, and they would do that with responsibility, I think.
But of course, from the perspective of parents who lost their children or had their children suffer some damages in their service, is there a need for the military to perhaps start from the very beginning, have a stronger screening test before they determine that person is fit for service in the army?
Yeah, but it is easier said than done. If we screen all the soldiers based on the certain criteria, we cannot have necessary numbers of the soldiers. And also the screening also may not that absolutely right. Some people could be good at certain field, but some people might be better at the other fields. That's why our military try to have many diverse activities. Some people is very good at sport, and some people is very good at training, and some people is very good at shooting, and some people is very good at harmonizing the others. So I think we have to be more active in the military society instead of reducing their activities, instead of trying to kind of contain their actions in the barracks.
What about the media or the public's approach to this matter? I mean, yes, it is a very disheartening story, but at the same time, some say that having too much of an emotional approach could be problematic as well.
Yes, I think so. I think you may feel the same thing. It is a changing into the gossip style issues instead of the very serious
sensationalizing,
yes.
perhaps.
I think the media may need to point to find the deep-rooted causes of this problem instead of delivering the news of some very not good-looking scholars. And also, I think the media should try to focus what could be the remedies and precautions and what could be wrong in the past instances. So I think we may need to do some research instead of trying to deliver only the facts and some kind of what you call intriguing issues.
Right. Wow, those are really mind-blowing and really deep look into the possible root of the problems of the current military in Korea. Thank you for those insights, Dr. Arirang.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you. Face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Na Hyung-kyung and Daniel Che.
Arirang News. Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has issued its highest level alert for the crisis in West Africa involving the Ebola outbreak. That means more staff and resources will be diverted toward containing its spread. It's the first time since the flu pandemic in 2009 that the agency has raised its alert to the highest level. The Ebola virus is now feared to have spread to the Middle East with the death of a 40-year-old Saudi man under observation for an Ebola infection. Now, new figures released by the WHO show in the period between Saturday and Monday, there were 108 new cases of Ebola and 45 additional deaths in Guinea, Liberia, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone, pushing the death toll to 932. Now, Russia is closing its food market to countries that imposed sanctions on Moscow amid continuing global sparring over Ukraine. Experts say it could have substantial impact on European farmers in particular, as Russia is their biggest buyer of agricultural products. Kwon So-ah has the details.
Responding to the tougher economic sanctions recently imposed on Russia by the EU and the US, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered a one-year ban of agricultural produce, food and vegetable imports on nations that have imposed sanctions against Russia. The government has been ordered to come up with a specific list of goods. Russia's move will have a big impact on Western exporters, as Russia imports nearly a third of its fruit products from the EU, and the US is its second biggest poultry importer. In an attempt to lessen the impact on domestic consumers, Russian authorities say they're looking for alternative partners. Talks with Argentina, Ecuador, and Brazil are already scheduled for this week. Earlier, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev reportedly said Moscow was considering banning European airlines from flying to Asia over Siberia. The sanctions against Russia began with Russia's annexation of Crimea in March, but were strengthened last week, now targeting Russia's defense, financial, and oil sectors. This came in response to Russia's continuous support for pro-Moscow separatists in Ukraine.
We don't know yet whether sanctions are working. Sanctions are working as intended in putting enormous pressure and strain on the Russian economy. If you look at projections for Russian growth, what you're seeing is that the economy has ground to a halt.
Meanwhile, there are concerns Russia could be planning an invasion, as Moscow is believed to have massed some 20,000 combat-ready troops at its border with Ukraine. NATO says Moscow could go in on the pretext of a humanitarian or peacekeeping mission as Kiev gains ground on separatist-held territory. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Korea's auto industry fared well last month, with production, exports, and domestic sales all up. According to trade figures, the output of vehicles stood at nearly 410,000 in July. That's up 22% from a year earlier. The spike was attributed to more working days in July this year and holiday season falling in August. Outbound shipments jumped 16%, while domestic sales rose 4%. Exports of auto parts also hit a monthly high in July at nearly $2.5 billion. Korea's taxation system isn't helping to bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. That's according to data compiled by the OECD and the National Assembly Budget Office here in Korea. It shows that Korea's poverty rate before taxation was the lowest among 27 OECD countries that were surveyed at 0.17%. However, it drops ever so slightly to 0.15% after taxation, which is higher than the OECD average. In fact, Korea's poverty rate after taxation is similar to countries such as Israel, Chile, and Spain. Other countries' poverty rate showed a wide margin before and after taxation, except in the case of Korea, suggesting the country's taxation system didn't do much to bridge the income disparity of its people. Benefits such as tax cuts being provided to high-income Korean households was pinpointed as a likely reason for the minimal impact. Well, wearable technology is all the rage these days, and I understand, Hyun-kyung, you are armed with two rival smartphone brands, so I assume you are counting down to the days when you can get your hands on those devices.
You know what? Well, thank you for revealing that I have two phones. But yes, shipments of wearable devices are expected to top 19 million this year. I have yet to buy one wearable device for me, though. I think one of them has your name on it. And it has been, with technology, with progress, always there are downsides to this miracle of modern science. That's right. They do provoke curiosity and add a little extra convenience to our lives, but they also come with privacy issues. Our Kim Min-ji tells us more.
The explosive growth of wearable devices has also brought with it privacy concerns. According to a new report by Korea's National Information Society Agency, there are mounting fears of misuse or abuse of information, as wearable devices are able to collect a variety of personal information regardless of place or time. Front and center is Google Glass, which can record everything in view and share it in an instant. The product's facial recognition app, named Tag, is also raising alarms as a user can get their hands on personal information, including a person's name and their photos on social media, just by taking a photo of them. A U.S. senator has already called on Google to come up with measures so that the application only identifies people who have given the permission to do so. Other countries are also stepping up efforts to protect personal information. The British Data Protection Act prohibits the use of personal information obtained through wearable devices for advertisement or business purposes. Australia also offers detailed guidelines when it comes to privacy invasion through the use of digital devices. Korea, on the other hand, has a lot of ground to make up. Wearable devices do not fall into the category of network cameras or image information processing devices, so relevant laws do not forbid their use. And to be punished by the current information network law, videos must contain pornography or violate privacy or portrait rights. The Korean agency's report points that there needs to be basic standards that can be applied to wearable devices. The Korea Communications Commission acknowledges there is a cause for concern and plans to review relevant laws and regulations. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we could squeeze into this newscast. Thank you for staying with us. To our viewers in different time zones, have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Na Hyun-kyung. To our viewers in Korea, have a good rest of the evening and do join us again tomorrow, same time.